At the New Year's gala of my ex-husband's family, I was the only one not wearing sequins or silk. My uniform was simple gray cotton sleeves rolled to my elbows, a white apron I had ironed until it could stand on its own. The guests arrived in a parade of perfume and laughter, stepping across the marble floor I had polished for 3 hours. They didn't notice me, which was the point. That was the role I had chosen to play. But when the daughter-in-law of the house, now the CEO's glamorous wife, dropped her champagne glass and pointed at me, every head turned. "You there, maid," she snapped, her voice sharp as glass. "Clean this up before someone slips." The crowd laughed. Not cruelly at first, just the kind of laughter that feeds on hierarchy. I bent down with a napkin and began wiping the floor. "She's slow," someone whispered. "Probably half blind already." Another voice joined in. "Can't believe they let the help stay during a company event." The laughter grew, echoing off the chandelier crystals like applause for a private joke. As I knelt on the marble, I could see their reflections on the floor, young faces distorted by wealth and arrogance. I kept wiping until the last trace of champagne was gone, then folded the napkin neatly and stood up. The CEO's wife smiled with satisfaction. "Good," she said. "Now stay near the kitchen in case we need more glasses." She turned to her husband, the man who had once called me mother when he was a boy. He nodded, not recognizing me or pretending not to. My voice trembled when I finally spoke, not from weakness, but from the effort of restraint. "Would you like me to stay until midnight, ma'am?" I asked. She smirked. "You midnight. Please, old lady, you should be asleep by then." More laughter. Even the waiters joined in, eyes darting toward me before looking away in guilt. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I'd managed in years. Because they didn't know. None of them did. They didn't know that the woman polishing their champagne stains was the legal owner of the mansion they were standing in. They didn't know that every chandelier, every inch of marble, every glass of imported wine had been paid for with money that once came from my husband's company, our company. They didn't know that the maid they mocked had once sat at the head of this table as Mrs. Helen Whitmore, co-founder of Whitmore Holdings. And they certainly didn't know that tonight, this New Year's Eve, I hadn't come here just to serve them dinner. I had come to reclaim what was mine. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with how I ended up here, how a woman once called Madam Helen became the help. It began 7 years ago when Robert Whitmore, my husband of 39 years, passed away from a sudden heart attack. He left behind an empire, 3 stepchildren from his first marriage, and one heartbroken widow who thought love still meant loyalty. During the funeral, his eldest son, Charles, stood beside me and whispered, "Don't worry, Helen. I'll take care of everything." I believed him. I didn't know that everything included erasing my name from the family's history. A month later, I was summoned to a meeting at the family law firm. They handed me a folder filled with revised documents and smiled politely. "For your convenience," they said. The will had been updated 2 weeks before Robert's death. Every major asset company shares properties. Even this mansion was listed under the management of Charles's holding company. My name appeared only once next to a line that said monthly living stipend. I asked for Robert's attorney, but he was on extended leave. I asked for the company accountant, but he had retired. The faces around me blurred into one indistinct smile of sympathy. When I walked out of that office, the city looked different. Colder, smaller, like it was closing in on me. Within 6 months, I'd been moved from the main house to a smaller property for comfort. Within a year, the checks stopped coming. They said there had been some restructuring. I called Charles, but his secretary always said he was traveling. Eventually, even the family driver stopped picking up my calls. I lived quietly for years in a 1-bedroom apartment surrounded by the ghosts of what I'd lost. Then one morning, a letter arrived from the county clerk's office. It was addressed to Mrs. Helen Whitmore, title holder of 14 Brookfield Avenue. My hands trembled as I opened it. The mansion was still legally mine. Robert had never completed the transfer. The so-called heirs were living in my home under my roof, under my name. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and made a decision that felt like breathing for the first time in years. I called an old friend, Harold Lang Roberts' former attorney. He answered on the second ring. "Helen," he said, softly, as if afraid to believe it was me. "I thought you'd gone abroad." "No," I said, "just forgotten." He went silent for a moment. "I've been waiting for this call." Over the following weeks, Harold helped me gather documents, deeds company records, proof of ownership. Each paper felt like a piece of my identity stitched back together. When we were done, he asked, "What do you want to do now?" I looked at the mansion's photograph lying on his desk and said, "Go home." It took me 2 months to arrange everything. A friend from my church recommended me for a housekeeping position at Whitmore Holdings' main estate. The irony was almost poetic. When the house manager asked if I had any experience, I said 40 years of managing men who thought they knew better. He laughed, not realizing how true it was. Within a week, I was hired. My name tag said Helen M. No one asked what the M stood for. The first day I returned to that mansion, I nearly lost my breath. The scent of jasmine still lingered in the garden, the same flowers Robert had planted for me on our anniversary. The furniture was the same, though someone had replaced the family portraits. My face was gone. In its place, Charles and his new wife beamed at the camera like royalty. I touched the edge of the frame and whispered, "You forgot the Queen." For months, I cleaned rooms I had once designed, served tea in the dining room I had furnished, and listened to them talk about investments, mergers, and power, as if they'd earned any of it. The humiliation was precise and methodical. Charles's wife, Vanessa, enjoyed treating me like an invisible servant. She would summon me with a snap of her fingers. "Helen, fetch me my wrap." "Helen, the silverware is crooked." "Helen, don't look me in the eye." Each command was a knife, but I learned to smile as I bled, because every time she called my name, she didn't realize she was speaking to the rightful owner of everything around her. Then came tonight the annual New Year's Gala. Over 200 guests, the elite of the city, gathered to celebrate another record-breaking year for Whitmore Holdings. Vanessa was radiant in gold silk. Charles gave his speech about legacy and leadership, never once mentioning his father. I stood in the corner holding a tray of champagne, my reflection tiny in the mirrored walls. And when that glass fell, when she ordered me to my knees in front of them all, I realized the time for silence was over. As I stood, the laughter still ringing in my ears, I felt something inside me. Shift, not anger, not shame, but clarity. I looked around the room, memorizing every face, every witness. They had taken everything from me once. Tonight, I would take everything back. If you've ever been treated like you don't matter, tell me how long would you stay silent before reclaiming your name? Comment 1 if you believe dignity never dies, like if you've ever been underestimated and wanted the world to remember who you truly are. Because this old maid is done pretending to be invisible. The first sign of betrayal didn't arrive as a storm. It came quietly in the calm after the funeral when people still spoke softly out of habit. I remember the smell of lilies filling the parlor, the scent clinging to my hair and clothes long after the mourners left. Robert's portrait stood beside the casket, his eyes forever calm, forever certain. He used to say, "Helen, a man's legacy isn't measured by what he builds, it's measured by what remains standing when he's gone." At the time, I thought he meant the company. Now I know he meant me. That night, Charles came into the study. His voice was gentle, too gentle, the kind people use when they're about to lie. You don't have to worry about anything he said, closing the door behind him. "I'll handle the company affairs. You just rest." I remember nodding, half listening, still drowning in grief. But even then, there was something rehearsed in his tone, a performance too smooth for mourning. "Your father loved you," I whispered. "He trusted you. He smiled faintly, and I won't let him down." A week later, the lawyers called me in. I didn't bring an attorney. I thought they were there to guide me. Instead, they presented papers clean, professional, merciless. To simplify the transition, they said. It's what Mr. Whitmore would have wanted. I signed where they pointed, too tired to read. The pen felt heavy like a weapon turned against its owner. By the time I realized what I'd done, the ink had already dried. I'd signed away the company shares, my shares, the 40% stake Robert had placed in my name 20 years earlier when we built Whitmore Holdings together. At first, I told myself it was fine. Family should take care of family. Charles was competent, ambitious, loyal, or so I thought, but small things began to change. My office at headquarters was moved temporarily to a smaller space. My access card stopped working after hours. When I asked the IT department, they said Mr. Whitmore's new policy. One morning, my parking spot was reassigned. A week later, my name disappeared from the executive roster entirely. The final insult came during the board meeting in March. I arrived early like I always did, with my notes neatly prepared. The receptionist hesitated when I entered. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly, "I don't think you're on the list today." I laughed, thinking it was a mistake. But when the glass doors opened, the boardroom was full. Charles at the head, surrounded by men who used to take my direction. He didn't look up when I entered. "Mother," he said without warmth, "this is a closed session." I froze. Closed to whom? To anyone without current board authority? The room fell silent. The men shifted uncomfortably, papers rustling like whispers of guilt. I wanted to remind him that the very chair he sat in had been chosen by me, that the company logo engraved on the wall was my design. But the words caught in my throat. "You can't erase me, Charles," I finally said. He didn't flinch. "I'm not erasing you, Mother. I'm protecting you. You don't need the stress of business anymore." He signaled to security. When they escorted me out of the building, no one looked at me. I could hear my heels clicking against the marble floor, the same rhythm I'd once walked with pride. That sound haunted me for years. I stayed silent. Pride can be a prison just as strong as shame. I told myself that Robert's spirit wouldn't want a public fight. I told myself that family mattered more than power. But each month the distance grew. The phone calls became shorter, then stopped. The monthly stipend Robert had arranged quietly vanished, replaced by automated emails that said pending approval. The servants at the mansion changed. My bedroom, the one Robert and I had shared, was converted into a home gym. By the second year, I was a guest in the house I'd built. Vanessa, his wife, was always polite in public, sugar, on the surface acid underneath. "Helen," she'd say with that smile, "you must miss having company. I can recommend some lovely retirement communities." I'd laugh lightly, pretending not to understand. "Thank you, dear. I'm sure I'll find the right place." I was already packing before she finished her sentence. When the moving truck pulled away, I stood on the sidewalk and watched the mansion disappear behind iron gates. The sun hit the windows just right, and for a moment it looked like it was burning. I remember whispering, "You've forgotten whose house this is." The years that followed were quiet. Too quiet. I rented a small apartment above a bakery on Maple Street. The owner, a kind woman named Ruth, would sometimes slip an extra loaf into my bag. "You remind me of my mother," she said. I smiled and told her I'd once had a house with 12 ovens. She thought I was joking, but grief can be fertile ground for clarity. I began keeping a box, a simple wooden chest filled with letters, contracts, photographs, pieces of my life that the Whitmores couldn't erase. One evening, while sorting through old files, I found an envelope sealed with Robert's handwriting. My heart stuttered. Inside was a property deed, 14 Brookfield Avenue, the mansion. The ownership box was checked next to my name. My hands trembled as I ran my fingers over the signature. The date was 1 month before his death. He'd never transferred it. I barely slept that night. My mind replayed every humiliation, every sneer, every "mother, you don't understand" business. When dawn came, I sat at the kitchen table, the document spread before me like an invitation. The city outside was waking up indifferent as always, but I was done being indifferent. The next morning, I went to the county clerk's office. The clerk, a young woman with tired eyes, looked up the file. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "This property is under your name. Taxes are being paid through an account ending in 9041. I frowned. That was my old personal account, the one I'd left dormant. "Who's been paying those taxes?" I asked. She shrugged. "System shows automatic transfers from the same account." My breath caught. Robert had set it up before he died. Even in death, he'd been protecting me. That evening, I called Harold. "It's still mine," I told him. Silence stretched over the line. Then he said, "Helen, I knew this day would come." He met me at his office the next morning, the same office where Robert used to discuss quarterly projections. The walls were lined with books, their spines worn from decades of secrets. "We can contest everything," he said. "You have legal ground, ironclad." I shook my head. "No lawyers, no court battles. I don't want revenge through paperwork." He studied me for a long time. Then what do you want? I looked at the photo of Robert on his shelf, smiling in the same suit he'd been buried in. I want them to see me. That's when the idea began to take shape, not revenge, not yet, but revelation. I would return to the house not as a ghost of the past, but as a shadow they couldn't see coming. If they saw a maid, I would become one. If they saw a nobody, I would wear invisibility like armor. Let them believe I'd vanished. It's easier to haunt people when they think you're gone. By the time the job posting appeared, housekeeper needed for estate management, discretion required, I was ready. It felt almost poetic that they didn't recognize my name. Maybe they never really saw me at all. The first sign of betrayal had come years ago, but tonight I was about to return the favor. If you've ever trusted the wrong people, tell me how many lies would it take before you stop forgiving comment 1. If you've learned the hard way that silence can be mistaken for weakness, like if you believe patience has an expiration date, because mine just ran out. The first morning I walked back into that house, the past hit me like the scent of old perfume, familiar, intoxicating, and suffocating. The same marble floors gleamed beneath my shoes, though now I wore rubber soles instead of heels. The same chandeliers hung above, though their light seemed colder. I stood in the grand foyer waiting for the house manager, a nervous man named Peter who glanced at me as if measuring my silence. "You're the new maid?" he asked. I nodded. "Helen M.," I said softly. He handed me a clipboard filled with rules. "Mrs. Whitmore is particular. Don't speak unless spoken to. Never enter the study without permission. And be invisible during events." Invisible. The word settled over me like a shroud. That first week, I learned the rhythm of the mansion again, the hum of the central heating system, the creak in the third step of the grand staircase, the way the sunlight hit the east windows at exactly 7:15 a.m. I polished silver I once chose from catalogs. I scrubbed tiles I'd personally ordered from Italy. I folded linens embroidered with my own initials, now mistaken for house management. Every task was a small cruelty wrapped in routine. Vanessa, of course, made sure I never forgot my place. She would sweep into rooms trailing expensive perfume, her voice sharp with that effortless cruelty of the entitled. "Helen," she'd say, "you missed a spot." Or, "You should smile more, it makes the staff look friendlier." Sometimes she'd stop mid-sentence and squint at me. "You remind me of someone," she'd murmur, then dismiss it with a laugh. Never mind, I'd bow my head. "Yes, ma'am." One afternoon, as I was dusting the library, I found the first piece of my husband's handwriting in years. A note tucked between books, yellowed and fragile. "For Helen, in case they forget who built this." My fingers shook as I unfolded it. Inside was a single line from Robert's old speech notes. "The foundation of any empire is gratitude. Forget that and the walls will crumble." I slipped it into my apron pocket and kept working the words echoing in my mind. By the second month, I understood how everything worked, or rather, how it didn't. Charles ran the company like a politician, all image and no integrity. He came home late, usually smelling of whiskey and power. Vanessa ran the house like a stage performing domestic perfection while treating her staff like props. Their children, 2 teenagers, Max and Lily, floated through rooms like ghosts of privilege, unaware of anyone beneath their social tier, except for one person, Samuel. Samuel was the youngest, barely 19, awkward and quiet. He spent more time in the garden than at family dinners. One morning, as I brought tea to the veranda, I caught him sketching the old fountain Robert had built. He looked up, startled. "I didn't hear you come out," he said. His voice carried none of the arrogance of his siblings. I smiled. Artists rarely do. He laughed softly. "You sound like my grandfather." The word made my chest tighten. "You knew him well?" I asked. "Not really," he admitted. "He died when I was 12, but my mom says I take after him." His eyes lingered on my face for a moment too long. "You have kind eyes, familiar somehow." Before I could answer, Vanessa's voice sliced through the air from the terrace. "Samuel, don't bother the staff. Helen has work to do." After that, Samuel always greeted me quietly whenever our paths crossed, as if he sensed something the others couldn't. Once, when Vanessa scolded me in front of guests for bringing the wrong wine, he muttered, "You didn't deserve that." I pretended not to hear, but later I found a small note tucked under the teapot on my cart. I know they treat you badly. Don't let them win. It was the first kindness anyone had shown me in that house. Meanwhile, Harold and I met in secret. Once a week, I'd leave the mansion under the pretext of grocery shopping and meet him at a quiet cafe near the old courthouse. He'd slide papers across the table, tax records, property documents, bank statements. You own everything, Helen, he reminded me. The deed, the shares, the trust fund, everything. But if you move too early, they'll bury you under legal smoke. I sipped my tea, pretending calm. Then I'll wait until the fire burns bright enough for everyone to see. The more time I spent inside that house, the more rot I uncovered. Staff whispered in the kitchen about missing pension payments, late wages, cut corners. Mrs. Whitmore says the company's restructuring, one of the cooks muttered, but they're still hosting gala dinners every weekend. Another maid rolled her eyes. Restructuring my foot. They just don't want to pay people. I kept my head down, listening, memorizing every detail. One evening, while cleaning Charles's study, I found a file labeled Legacy Transfers. Inside were forged signatures, mine among them. My name twisted into someone else's handwriting used to approve voluntary estate redistribution. My stomach turned. It wasn't just greed, it was fraud. I took photos of every page, careful not to disturb a single paper. When I showed Harold later that week, he exhaled sharply. "This is enough to ruin them, Helen." I shook my head. Not yet. I don't want ruin. I want revelation. But pretending to be invisible takes its toll. The humiliation became ritual. One night, during a dinner party, Vanessa dropped her diamond bracelet under the table and called out, "Helen, crawl under there and fetch it, would you?" The guests chuckled. I knelt without a word, the laughter pressing on my back like a weight. My fingers brushed the cold marble, and for a moment I saw my reflection, wrinkled skin, silver hair, eyes that had seen too much. I wasn't their maid. I was their mirror, showing them everything ugly they'd become. After the guests left, I stayed to clean the dining room. Vanessa came back alone, her heels echoing like punctuation. "You know," she said, pouring herself another drink, "people like you are lucky. You don't have to think, just follow orders. Must be peaceful." I met her eyes for the first time. "Peace," I said slowly, "comes to those who've already survived war." She laughed, mistaking my words for senility. "Whatever you say, Grandma." She left the room, still laughing. That night I went to the attic. No one ever went there anymore. Dust thickened the air, coating forgotten furniture and boxes of old photographs. In the corner, under a sheet, I found Robert's old desk, the one I'd chosen for him on his first day as CEO. Inside the drawer was a framed picture, Robert and me standing on the front steps of the mansion, both smiling as if we had conquered the world. The glass was cracked, but the image was intact. I sat on the floor, the photo in my lap, and whispered, "They think they've taken everything, Robert, but they can't take the truth." That was the night I decided to stop waiting. The masquerade had served its purpose. I had learned every secret, every lie, every weakness. They thought I was a maid. I was an executioner disguised as mercy. If you've ever been underestimated, tell me, how long could you pretend before showing them who you really are? Comment 1, if you've ever hidden your strength just to survive. Like if you believe silence can be the sharpest weapon of all. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one writing the ending. By the third month, the mansion no longer felt like a home. It felt like a theater built on cruelty. Every corner echoed with Vanessa's voice, each word sharpened by condescension. She had turned humiliation into an art form, and I was her chosen exhibit. It started subtly an eye roll, a sigh, but soon it became performance. "Helen, you're hopeless," she would say in front of guests, waving her manicured hand. "Maybe we should hire someone younger, someone who can remember things." The laughter that followed was always polite, never kind. I learned to bow slightly, to whisper "yes, ma'am," while my heart burned quietly inside my chest. But it wasn't just her. Charles had changed too. There was a new impatience in him, a constant irritation that spilled into everything. He barked orders at the staff, slammed doors, shouted on the phone about losses and investors pulling out. I would hear him pacing his office late at night, cursing under his breath. The empire he had stolen was beginning to crumble, and he didn't even know that the cracks started with the same woman sweeping his floors. One Friday evening, the tension broke through the walls. Vanessa had invited a group of socialites from the charity board for dinner. It was supposed to be a casual night in, but her version of casual included imported caviar and champagne that cost more than my first car. I spent the entire afternoon polishing silverware, preparing canapes, and setting the table under her sharp instructions. "Everything must be perfect," she hissed. These women noticed details. When the guests arrived, they floated through the foyer like a perfume cloud, exchanging air kisses and empty compliments. "Your house is stunning," Vanessa, one of them, cooed. "I can't imagine the upkeep." Vanessa laughed. "Oh, I don't worry about that. I have help." Her eyes slid toward me. "Helen here practically lives for cleaning. Don't you, Helen?" The laughter was soft, but it stung all the same. I smiled the way I taught myself to controlled unreadable. "I take pride in my work, ma'am," I said. Vanessa tilted her head as if amused by my civility. "Of course you do. It's all you have, isn't it?" The words hit the table like spilled wine, an accident disguised as sophistication. The room went quiet. Even her friends looked uneasy. But Vanessa only sipped her drink, pretending not to notice the silence she'd created. Later that night, when the party ended and the guests had gone, I stayed behind to clean. The smell of perfume lingered, mixed with something bitter, like the aftertaste of false laughter. Vanessa came back into the dining room, still holding her champagne glass. "Don't look so serious, Helen," she said, slurring slightly. "It's just a joke." I looked up from the table. "It's a joke you tell often," she smiled glassy-eyed. "Maybe because it's true." She stepped closer, too close. "You think I don't see the way you look at me, like you're better than me? You're just a relic, a leftover from someone else's life." I stared at her, holding her gaze until she faltered. "Relics last longer than fads," I said quietly. She blinked, then laughed. "You're funny for a maid." She left the room, her laughter echoing down the hallway. That night, I lay awake in the small attic room they'd given me. The walls were thin, the air stale, but it was still my fortress. I stared at the cracked ceiling and thought of Robert's words. The foundation of any empire is gratitude. Vanessa and Charles had built theirs on greed. That meant it would fall. It was only a matter of time. I just had to make sure I was standing when it did. Days turned into weeks. The tension in the house grew heavier like humidity before a thunderstorm. The staff began to whisper that the company was in trouble. Vendors weren't being paid. Clients were withdrawing. Even the charity events were smaller now, the champagne less expensive, the smiles more desperate. I noticed Charles drinking more Vanessa, snapping more Samuel, retreating further into his solitude. One morning, as I polished the stair railing, I overheard an argument in Charles's office. His voice was raw, strained. "You can't keep spending like this," he shouted. "The accounts are frozen until next quarter." Vanessa's reply was cold, controlled. "Then unfreeze them. You're the CEO, aren't you?" "You don't understand," he snapped. "We're bleeding cash. The board is asking questions. If they find out about the transfers." He stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. I leaned closer to the door, heart pounding. Vanessa's voice dropped to a whisper. "If they find out about the transfers, you'll handle it, like you handled your father's estate." The sound of glass shattering followed. I backed away before they could see me, but the words burned into my mind. "Like you handled your father's estate." She knew. She knew everything. And she was using it to control him. Later that day, I found Samuel sitting alone in the garden sketchbook, in hand, the winter sunlight soft on his face. "Rough day," I said, placing a cup of tea beside him. He smiled weakly. "Rough life." He closed his sketchbook. "I heard them fighting again. It's always about money." I sat beside him on the stone bench. Money has a way of revealing people's true nature. He looked at me then, studying my face. "You talk like someone who's seen it all." I met his gaze. "Maybe I have." For the first time, I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "You really do remind me of my grandfather," he said softly. "He used to say things like that." He hesitated, then asked, "Did you know him?" I smiled faintly. "Better than anyone." He frowned confused. But before he could speak, Vanessa's voice called from the balcony. "Samuel inside, now." He sighed and stood. "You should be careful," he whispered. "She's been asking questions about you." That night, I noticed the change. My cleaning supplies had been moved, my drawer slightly open. My phone, not really mine, but a small prepaid device Harold had given me, was missing. When I asked the head housekeeper, she said Mrs. Whitmore wanted a staff inspection, something about security. I nodded, hiding my fear beneath calm. They were watching me now. Vanessa's suspicions were awakening like a snake stirring under warm stones. The following evening, as I prepared tea for the family, Vanessa entered the kitchen all silk and perfume. "I've been thinking," she said casually. "You've been here for months, and I still don't know much about you. Where did you work before this?" I kept my tone light. "Small households, ma'am. Private employers." Names she pressed. "Discretion was part of my job," I said. Her smile tightened. "How convenient." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You're not who you say you are you?" For a heartbeat, the room went silent except for the ticking clock. I met her eyes and said, "Does it matter as long as your floors shine?" She blinked, startled by my composure, then straightened. "It matters to me." After she left, I locked myself in the pantry and took a deep breath. The air smelled of spices and fear. I pulled out my backup phone, the one Harold had insisted I keep hidden, and sent a single message. "They're getting close. Move everything to secure storage." His reply came within seconds. "Understood. Are you safe?" I typed for now. But the truth was, safety had never been part of the plan. I had come here to be seen, and now they were finally looking. Every insult, every command, every cruel laugh had been building to this moment. The pressure was rising. I could feel the house itself beginning to turn. The lights flickered more often. The pipes groaned. The walls, once pristine, showed small cracks. Maybe it was just age, or maybe even bricks know when justice is coming. One night, as rain hammered against the windows, I stood in the main hall looking at my reflection in the marble floor, the same place where they'd made me kneel months ago. My face was lined, my hair silver, but my eyes were alive. I whispered to the empty room, "You wanted me invisible. You're about to regret that. If you've ever swallowed your pride just to survive, tell me how long before it turns into fuel." Comment 1. If you've ever pretended to bow while planning to rise, like if you believe every humiliation is just a seed waiting for the right storm to bloom. Because this storm is coming, and I am done waiting for permission to exist. It was the night of the company's annual charity gala, the grandest event of the year, and the night that would test the limits of my silence. I had polished every inch of marble in that ballroom until it gleamed like ice-ironed, hundreds of napkins, until my fingers ached and arranged the gold-plated cutlery with precision only a former hostess would know. The theme was legacy and renewal, a cruel irony that tasted like rust on my tongue. By 7 o'clock, the mansion came alive with music and expensive laughter. Guests in sequined gowns and tailored tuxedos glided across the floor like they owned the world. The press was there too, cameras flashing, capturing the perfect illusion of wealth and harmony. Vanessa floated among them like a golden idol, radiant, flawless, every smile rehearsed. Beside her, Charles shook hands and told stories that weren't his to tell. They toasted to growth, to family, to honor. I moved between tables unseen, refilling glasses and collecting empty ones, my presence blending into the hum of luxury. But beneath the glitter, tension shimmered like heat. I could see it in the way Vanessa's smile tightened whenever Charles mentioned the company. I could hear it in the whispered exchanges between investors. Their laughter, too, forced their glances too wary. Harold had told me last week that a whistleblower complaint had reached the SEC, anonymous, detailed, and devastating. I hadn't asked who filed it. I already knew. At 8:30, while the string quartet played something soft and meaningless, Vanessa called out across the room, "Helen, be a dear and bring us more champagne." Her voice carried sharp as a whip, heads turned. I walked toward her tray in hand, every step measured. "Yes, ma'am," I said quietly. "Could you hurry?" She pressed her tone playful for the crowd, but cutting for me. The VIP table shouldn't have to wait for the help. The word help fell heavy in the air. A A few guests shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a woman from the board of directors, offered a sympathetic smile. Vanessa saw it and doubled down. You see, she continued, turning to her friends. Helen here is our longest-serving maid. She's practically part of the furniture. Isn't that right, dear? My grip tightened around the tray. Every instinct screamed to walk away, but I didn't. I smiled instead. Furniture lasts longer than people, ma'am, I said softly. The laughter that followed was nervous, unsure whose side it should land on. Vanessa's eyes flashed, her pride bruised. Careful, Helen, she said through gritted teeth. Sarcasm doesn't suit you. I bowed my head and left the table, heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. In the kitchen, I set the tray down and gripped the counter until my hands stopped trembling. The chef, an old man named Marco, looked at me with pity. She's drunk, he muttered. Ignore her. I shook my head. I've ignored worse. When I returned to the ballroom, the speeches had begun. Charles stood at the podium. Glass raised his voice, booming through the hall. To our family legacy, he declared. To those who came before us and to those who keep building our dream. I wondered if he felt the weight of his own hypocrisy. I wondered if he even remembered the dream he'd stolen. Then Vanessa took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice smooth and commanding. I'd like to take a moment to honor someone special. Someone who's been with our family for decades. My stomach turned. I already knew where this was going. She gestured toward me. Helen, come up here. For a moment, I couldn't move. The spotlight hit me like a blade. The guests turned, applauding, politely expecting a sentimental gesture. I walked toward the stage slowly, the click of my shoes against marble echoing like a countdown. Vanessa beamed as I reached her side. This woman, she said, placing a hand on my shoulder, has served this family for 30 years, 40. She looked at me expectantly. 41, I said. She laughed. 41 years. Imagine the patience it takes to stay invisible for that long. The audience chuckled, unsure whether it was supposed to be funny. My jaw tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. And tonight, Vanessa continued, we'd like to give her a small token of appreciation. She turned to the table where the staff gifts were laid out and picked up a small box wrapped in silver ribbon. A watch, she said proudly, so you'll always know when it's time to serve. The laughter this time was louder, crueler. My vision blurred for a second, not from tears, but from the sheer effort of holding them back. I took the box, my hands steady, despite the storm inside me. Thank you, ma'am, I said. It's beautiful. She smiled, triumphant, basking in the approval of the crowd. Would you like to say a few words, Helen? Every instinct told me to say no, to walk away, but I looked out across that sea of faces. Faces that had eaten off my china, drunk my wine, mocked my existence, and something inside me broke free. Just one, I said, my voice clear. The microphone picked it up perfectly. Funny thing about time, it always runs out. The silence that followed was thick, confused, uneasy. Vanessa forced a laugh. She's full of surprises, isn't she? She said, trying to wave it off. But her smile faltered when I didn't look away. I stepped down from the stage and walked straight to the back of the room, leaving the box behind on the podium. In the kitchen, Marco grabbed my arm. What are you doing? He hissed. You'll get yourself fired. I smiled faintly. You can't fire someone who doesn't work for you. I spent the next hour cleaning in silence, though my mind was anything but quiet. The humiliation burned through me, but beneath it was something colder clarity. I had spent months gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. Tonight had shown me that the moment wasn't coming. I would have to create it. Near midnight, the guests began to leave. The ballroom emptied slowly, the echoes of music fading into the heavy quiet of aftermath. Vanessa stumbled past me, tipsy, her laughter sharp and brittle. Don't forget to lock up, she said, waving her hand dismissively, and clean the fountain, it's filthy. When the last car pulled away, the mansion was silent again. I walked into the ballroom one last time. The lights were dim, the floor littered with confetti and broken glass. I could still hear Vanessa's laughter in my head, the words, so you'll always know when it's time to serve, ringing, like a curse. I went to the stage and picked up the box she'd given me. Inside was a gold-plated watch, heavy and gaudy. I turned it over in my hand. The engraving read, "To Helen," for her years of service. My reflection glinted in the metal, older, sharper, alive. I closed the box and whispered, "You're right, Vanessa. It is time to serve justice. Before heading to my room, I went to Charles's office. The door was unlocked. It always was after these parties. He trusted security systems more than people. I stepped inside, the smell of whiskey and cigar smoke hanging in the air. His desk was cluttered with documents, contracts, financial ledgers, and on top of them, an envelope stamped with the logo of the Securities and Exchange Commission. I smiled faintly. The storm had already reached their door. I slipped one of Harold's USB drives into the computer and copied the latest files. My hands moved automatically. Steady, efficient. Years of running a household had taught me how to work quietly in chaos. When the download finished, I left everything exactly as I'd found it. Back in my attic room, I sat on the narrow bed and looked out the small window. The city lights shimmered in the distance, indifferent to everything happening beneath them. I thought of Robert, of his steady hands and calm voice, of the way he used to say, "Helen, storms don't scare strong foundations, they reveal them." I finally understood what he meant. The next morning, the air in the house was different. Tense. The newspapers had arrived early and the headlines screamed scandal. Whitmore Holdings under investigation for fraud. Anonymous whistleblower exposes financial misconduct. Vanessa's shrill voice echoed through the halls. "Charles, how could you let this happen?" he shouted back. "I didn't. Someone set us up." I stood in the hallway polishing the same brass railing I'd polished for months, pretending not to hear. But every word filled me with quiet satisfaction. For the first time, their empire was trembling. At noon, Vanessa stormed into the kitchen, phone in hand, fury radiating off her like heat. "Helen," she barked, "did you see this?" She thrust the newspaper toward me. "It's lies, all of it. Do you know who could have done this?" I looked at the headline, feigning surprise. "I wouldn't know, ma'am. People say a lot of things when the truth comes out." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't get clever with me. I've been watching you." "You're not who you say you are." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Who sent you?" For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then I said very softly, "Maybe the past did." She frowned, confused, but before she could speak, Charles burst into the room, face pale. "The SEC froze our accounts," he said, his voice trembling. "We're ruined." He looked at Vanessa, then at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "Who are you?" he whispered. I smiled, a small, calm, dangerous smile. "Just the help I said, and I think it's time I helped you remember who built this house." If you've ever been pushed to your breaking point, tell me, what would you do when the people who crushed you start to fall? Comment 1 if you believe patience always runs out, like if you think the quietest revenge is letting the truth speak louder than anger. Because after tonight, silence won't save them anymore. I had spent months buried beneath their contempt, waiting for the right moment to rise. Now it was here. The news had detonated like a bomb. By noon, the mansion that once buzzed with vanity had turned into a battlefield of whispers and panic. Vanessa barked orders at her assistants. Charles called his lawyers and the staff scurried like frightened birds. I stayed silent, watching the empire unravel one thread at a time. By the afternoon, 3 black sedans from the SEC were parked at the end of the driveway. Men in dark suits entered the mansion without a word, flashing badges as they passed. Vanessa tried to intercept them at the door, voice shrill, insisting it was a mistake. "You can't just walk in here," she shouted. The lead investigator ignored her. "Ma'am, we have a warrant." He handed her the paper with cold professionalism. She went pale, her voice collapsing into a whisper. I watched from the kitchen doorway, invisible as ever. But this time, invisibility was power. They had spent years treating me like a ghost tonight. I would show them how dangerous a ghost could be. By evening, Harold arrived. He entered through the back entrance coat, buttoned up against the wind, his briefcase clutched tightly. "You were right," he said, without preamble. "They falsified more than financials. They forged board signatures, including yours. The investigators have copies now. The company's under full audit." I nodded. "Good. It's time everyone knows whose name they buried." He hesitated. "Are you ready for that? Once this begins, you can't go back to anonymity. It will be public, your name, your story, your pain." I met his eyes. For years they stole my name. Tonight I take it back. He gave a slow smile, one of quiet respect. "Then I'll make sure the world listens." We spent the next few hours in the study. My study, though they'd claimed it as theirs. Harold spread out documents like cards in a deck property, deeds, shareholder records, marriage certificates. Robert's will, everything that tied my blood, sweat, and signature to Whitmore Holdings. You own 51% of the company, Harold said. Legally, you never lost it. The transfers they filed were void without your consent. I laughed softly. So all this time I've been cleaning my own house. Not for much longer, he said. There's a board meeting scheduled tomorrow morning at headquarters. Emergency session. They're desperate to contain this before the shareholders revolt. You should be there. I stared at the documents, the ink of my name faded but indelible. If I walk into that building, they'll know who I am. Exactly, Harold said. When he left, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. I went to the window and saw Samuel standing by the fountain, hands buried in his coat pockets, staring at the reflection of the lights. I went outside, the cold air biting at my skin. He turned when he heard me. You shouldn't be out here, he said softly. They're losing their minds inside. I know, I said. It's beautiful, isn't it? He looked puzzled. Beautiful. Watching liars trip over their own lies. He smiled faintly, but there was sadness in it. I've always hated that about them. Mom and Dad, they think the world is theirs to own. I studied him. There was something in his eyes, curiosity, maybe even understanding. You don't belong to their world, I said. He hesitated, then asked, Who are you really? I took a deep breath. For months I had hidden behind the mask of a maid, but Samuel wasn't like the others. He had his grandfather's eyes, Robert's eyes. He deserved the truth. I'm Helen Whitmore, I said quietly, your grandfather's wife. His mouth fell open. For a moment the only sound was the trickle of water from the fountain. That's impossible, he whispered. Grandfather's wife died years ago. I shook my head. No, Samuel, I lived. They buried me in paperwork, not in the ground. He stared at me, trying to process what he'd heard. Does my father know? He will. Why are you telling me this? Because you still have a soul, I said simply. And because tomorrow, when the truth comes out, I want at least one Whitmore in that room who understands what legacy really means. He exhaled slowly, eyes wide. You're the one who exposed them, aren't you? I didn't answer, but he didn't need me to. His expression shifted from shock to quiet admiration. If what you're saying is true, they deserve everything that's coming. I put a hand on his shoulder. Don't hate them, Samuel. Just learn from them. Build something honest. He nodded, his voice trembling. If you need help, I'll be there. The next morning, the mansion was chaos. Charles shouted into his phone in the study, while Vanessa paced the hallway, her composure finally cracking. The staff avoided them both, whispering among themselves. When I entered the kitchen, Marco looked up from his cutting board. Is it true, he asked? They're being investigated. I smiled. Truth has a way of cleaning house. At exactly 9:00 a.m., Harold's car pulled up at the front entrance. I had dressed carefully. No apron, no uniform. I wore a navy suit that had belonged to me before they stripped me of everything. My wedding ring glinted under the morning light, a symbol resurrected. As I walked past the staff, silence followed. Some looked away, others smiled faintly as if sensing a secret long overdue for revelation. Vanessa appeared at the top of the staircase, her face pale, her voice sharp. Where do you think you're going? To work, I said. She scoffed. You work here. I met her eyes calm and cold. Not anymore. Charles came out of the study, face drawn and tired. This isn't the time for your theatrics, Helen. I smiled. No, Charles, this is exactly the time. Harold stepped forward from the doorway, his presence steady as a verdict. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, he said politely. Mrs. Helen, Whitmore is on her way to the emergency board meeting as majority shareholder and co-founder of Whitmore Holdings. Vanessa blinked, her voice cracking. Majority shareholder? That's absurd. Charles's mouth opened, then closed again. What kind of game is this? No game, Harold said, holding up a folder. All original documents notarized, verified by the county clerk and the SEC. Ownership of the company and this property remains in Mrs. Whitmore's name. Any transfer filed under your authority was fraudulent. The color drained from Charles's face. That's impossible. I stepped closer. You should know by now, Charles, nothing's impossible when the truth comes home. Vanessa staggered backward, gripping the railing. "You're lying. You're nobody. You're just—" "The woman who hired you," I finished. "The woman who fed you. The woman whose name you used to steal everything you thought was yours." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Harold looked at his watch. "We should go. The board is waiting." As we walked toward the car, Samuel appeared by the door, his expression unreadable. "Good luck," he said quietly. I smiled. "Luck has nothing to do with it, dear, only truth." The drive to headquarters felt surreal. The city outside was gray and restless clouds rolling across the sky like an omen. Harold briefed me as we went. "The press will be there. They've already caught wind of the scandal. When you speak, stay calm. Don't defend yourself, state the facts. Let them drown in their own guilt." I nodded. I've waited years for this moment. I won't waste it. When we arrived, the building loomed ahead, 40 stories of glass and arrogance. I used to walk through those doors as Mrs. Whitmore, co-founder, respected, admired. Now I was walking back in as something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose. The boardroom was packed. Executives, lawyers, journalists, all whispering until the sound merged into a single nervous hum. Charles and Vanessa sat at the far end of the table, surrounded by their counsel. They froze when I entered. For the first time, neither of them had anything to say. I took my seat at the head of the table. My chair, my place. "Let's begin," I said. The room went silent. Harold distributed the documents, proof of ownership, evidence of fraud statements of mismanagement. Every page was a nail in their coffin. As the board members flipped through the files, murmurs spread like wildfire. One finally spoke. "Mrs. Whitmore, is this accurate?" "Yes," I said. "And every decision made under their leadership since my husband's death was unauthorized." Vanessa tried to interject, voice trembling. "You can't do this. You have no idea what you're starting." I met her gaze. "I'm not starting anything, Vanessa. I'm ending it." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the chairman cleared his throat. "Effective immediately, Charles and Vanessa Whitmore are suspended pending investigation. Control of Whitmore Holdings reverts to its rightful owner, Mrs. Helen Whitmore." Applause didn't erupt. It wasn't that kind of victory. The room was too stunned. Too reverent, too shaken by the sight of an old woman reclaiming an empire with nothing but truth. As we walked out, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. I didn't stop. The air felt lighter, the world sharper. I had been invisible long enough. If you've ever had your name stolen, your worth questioned, your dignity dismissed, tell me how sweet would it feel to take it back in front of everyone who doubted you. Comment 1 if you've ever dreamed of that moment. Like if you believe revenge isn't always destruction, sometimes it's restoration. Because today I didn't just win. I remembered who I was. By the time we returned from the board meeting, the mansion was no longer a home. It was a crime scene dressed in marble and silence. The house that had once hummed with music and arrogance now sat in stillness, its chandeliers unlit, its air heavy with the scent of fear. Every portrait on the wall, every polished surface seemed to look at me differently, as if the house itself had been waiting for its rightful mistress to come back. Vanessa was waiting in the foyer when I walked in. She still wore the same gold silk gown from the board meeting, but the fabric looked dull under the cold light. Her makeup had smudged around the eyes, mascara bleeding into her skin like guilt trying to hide itself. The glass of whiskey in her hand trembled slightly. "You," she said, her voice brittle. "You've destroyed everything." I removed my coat, slowly folding it neatly on the banister. "No, Vanessa," I said. "You destroyed it yourself. I just turned the lights on so everyone could see." She took a step forward, heels clicking against the marble, her expression twisting between rage and disbelief. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've humiliated us, your family." I met her eyes steady and unflinching. "My family died the day Robert was buried. Everything that came after was imitation." Her jaw tightened. "You think this is justice? You think you've won? Those men on that board, they don't care about you. They'll take the company apart piece by piece, and you'll be left with nothing but dust and sympathy." "Then at least I'll have honesty," I said. "And that's more than you've ever owned." She laughed, but there was no humor in it, only the brittle sound of someone holding on to a collapsing world. "You're a fool. You could have had everything. I would have let you stay here. You could have lived comfortably. But no, you had to play the martyr, the noble widow." What are you now? Helen, a tired old woman with a company you can't even run. I took a slow step toward her. You're wrong. I don't need to run it. I just needed to clean it. She sneered, but I saw her mask cracking, her composure slipping inch by inch. You think anyone will respect you after this? They'll call you vindictive insane, an old woman desperate for attention. I smiled faintly. They already called me worse-made relic nobody, and yet here we are. Her eyes narrowed. You think I didn't know who you were? She spat suddenly. The moment I saw you, I felt it. You carried yourself like someone who used to matter. But I wanted to see how long you'd last before you broke. I wanted to watch you bend. My pulse stayed steady, and I wanted to see how long it would take before your greed snapped. She flung the whiskey glass against the wall, its shattered amber liquid sliding down the marble like tears. You ruined my life. No, I said quietly. You borrowed it. The room fell into silence again. The only sound was the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, counting down the seconds to something inevitable. She turned away, pacing. Charles is at the office trying to salvage what's left, she said. You should pray he succeeds, because if he doesn't, the whole family goes down with him, including your precious reputation. I'm not afraid of ruin, I said. I've lived through it once. It teaches you how to rebuild without permission. Her voice dropped to a hiss. You think you're righteous, don't you? But tell me, Helen, what kind of woman hides in her own house for months pretending to be a servant? What kind of woman watches her family fall apart and does nothing until she can destroy it publicly? The kind of woman who was erased and decided to return as a ghost, I said. Because ghosts don't need permission to haunt. She froze. For a moment I thought she might cry, but instead she smiled a cold, broken smile. You think this is over? You don't know Charles like I do. He'll find a way to turn this around. He always does. Charles doesn't have the truth on his side anymore, I said. That's what he never understood. Truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs time. She laughed again, sharp and cruel, but this time it sounded hollow. Truth. The world doesn't care about truth. It cares about power, and you, dear Helen, no longer have any. I stepped closer until we were face to face, two reflections in a shattered mirror. Then let me remind you who gave you yours. She flinched as I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Do you recognize this? I asked. Her eyes flicked down. The color drained from her face. It was a letter dated 12 years ago, written in her own handwriting, addressed to a man she thought was dead. Robert, I promise to protect what you built. I'll keep Helen comfortable. You can trust me. Her voice came out in a whisper. Where did you get that? I found it in Robert's study, I said. He never mailed it. Maybe he saw through you before I did. Her hand trembled as she reached for the letter, but I held it out of reach. You lied to him, you lied to me, and when he died, you used that lie to climb higher. Her voice broke. I did what I had to. No, I said, my tone cutting through her excuse. You did what you wanted. There's a difference. She turned away, her shoulders shaking. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, You'll never forgive me, will you? I thought about that for a while. Forgiveness isn't my job, I said finally. Consequences are. The front door opened, then the sound echoing through the quiet. Charles stumbled in his tie, loosened his face pale and drenched with sweat. He looked like a man who'd been fighting a war he'd already lost. The press won't stop calling, he muttered. The investors want blood, the board's voting to remove us completely. He looked up and froze when he saw me. You, he said, his voice shaking. You planned this. I didn't have to plan anything, I said. You did the work for me. He took a step forward, his hands trembling. You think you can just waltz back into our lives and take everything I built that company from nothing. You built it from my foundation, I said. From my name, my money, my husband's trust. You just redecorated the ruins. He pointed at me, his anger teetering on desperation. You're nothing without us. I took a slow step forward. I was everything before you. He laughed bitterly. You'll regret this, old woman. You've made enemies you can't imagine. Then I suppose I'll have company, I said. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a trapped animal. You don't understand how business works. This isn't about morality, it's about survival. You think investors care about who's right or wrong. They'll gut the company, sell it off, and you'll be left with ashes. Maybe, I said, but at least they'll be my ashes. He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw it the first flicker of fear. The kind of fear that only comes when a man realizes his power has limits. "You don't have what it takes to lead," he spat. I smiled faintly. Maybe not, but I have what it takes to end this. Before he could answer, Vanessa stepped between us, her voice cracking. "Stop it, both of you! Don't you see? It's over. We've lost." Charles turned on her. "We lost because of you. You and your stupid games. You couldn't keep your mouth shut." She slapped him. The sound echoed across the marble like a gunshot. He froze, hand pressed to his cheek, eyes wide with disbelief. "You ruined us," she said, voice trembling. "You and your greed." I watched them, husband and wife partners in betrayal, collapse under the weight of their own choices. For years, they'd stood on a pedestal built from lies, and now it was crumbling beneath them. I turned toward the door. "I'll be in the ballroom," I said softly. "We'll settle this once and for all in front of everyone who needs to hear it." Vanessa looked at me, her voice small now. "You're going to make it public." I met her eyes one last time. "You made me invisible in private. It's only fair I return the favor in public." As I walked away, I could hear the sound of their argument erupting again behind me. Accusations blame panic. It was the sound of power dying the final act before the curtain falls. If you've ever been cornered, if you've ever watched your oppressors turn on each other, tell me, would you stop them or would you let them destroy themselves? Comment 1. If you believe karma doesn't need help, it just needs time. Like if you think the best revenge is watching silence turn into confession. Because in that house, the ghosts finally had names and justice had found its voice. The next evening, the Whitmore mansion, my mansion, was lit brighter than it had been in years. Every chandelier blazed as if the house itself wanted to witness redemption. The board had requested a press conference to address the recent allegations, but everyone knew what it really was, a public execution disguised as damage control. They'd chosen the ballroom for the event, the same room where Vanessa once made me kneel and wipe champagne off the floor. Now the long marble expanse gleamed under the heat of stage lights and camera flashes. Rows of chairs filled the room. Journalists, investors, employees, even former board members, all hungry for blood. At the far end of the hall, a massive banner read, "Whitmore Holdings, Legacy of Excellence." The irony was exquisite. Charles stood behind the podium trying to look composed, but his hands betrayed him. They wouldn't stop trembling. Vanessa sat in the front row, face pale, eyes ringed with exhaustion. She hadn't spoken to him since their fight last night. I waited by the double doors, watching from the shadows, Harold beside me. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "Once you walk out there, there's no turning back." I looked down at my reflection in the polished floor at the woman I had become, silver hair pinned neatly. Navy suit pressed sharp, no trace of the maid they'd laughed at. "Harold," I said quietly, "I turned my back years ago. Tonight I'm just facing forward." He nodded, stepping aside as the moderator announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the acting CEO of Whitmore Holdings, Mr. Charles Whitmore." The applause was hesitant, more obligatory than genuine. Charles adjusted the microphone, his smile brittle. "Good evening. I want to thank you all for being here. As many of you know, our company has faced challenges in recent days, allegations of financial misconduct, misinformation rumors. I'm here tonight to set the record straight." He looked out across the audience, trying to project authority, but the room wasn't buying it. I could feel it, the shifting current of doubt. He continued, "My father, the late Robert Whitmore, built this company on integrity and innovation, and I intend to preserve that legacy." That was my cue. I pushed open the doors. The sound echoed through the hall, sharp and sudden. All eyes turned. I walked slowly down the aisle, the click of my heels deliberate, rhythmic, like a countdown. Charles froze at the podium, his face draining of color. Vanessa straightened in her seat, her knuckles white. The cameras swiveled toward me, flashes erupting like lightning. I stopped halfway down the aisle and spoke clearly, my voice cutting through the murmurs. "That's a beautiful sentiment, Charles. Shame it's built on a lie." The room went dead silent. The moderator looked panicked. "Ma'am, this is a private event." "Private," I laughed softly. "No, dear, this is public now." The world deserves to know who's been speaking for Whitmore Holdings and who the company truly belongs to. Charles tried to recover. Security. He barked, his voice cracking. Remove her. But no one moved. The guards looked at each other confused. Then Harold stepped forward, holding a folder high. Don't bother. Mrs. Helen Whitmore is the legal majority shareholder and co-founder of Whitmore Holdings. She doesn't need an invitation. She is the company. The room erupted in whispers. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. I walked toward the stage, every step erasing another year of silence. When I reached the podium, Charles tried to block me. You're making a mistake, he hissed under his breath. You'll destroy everything. Everything worth destroying was built on betrayal, I said. Now move. He hesitated, then stepped aside, defeated. I took the podium facing the sea of cameras and faces that once looked through me. Good evening, I began. My name is Helen Whitmore. Some of you may remember me. Most of you were told I was dead or irrelevant. For 7 years, I was neither. I was watching. The crowd leaned forward. I continued, my voice steady, sharp. While you toasted to profits, I was polishing the floors of my own home. While you praised leadership, I watched those in charge bleed this company dry. And while you laughed at a woman you thought was invisible, I rebuilt everything they stole. Document by document, lie by lie. Gasps rippled through the audience. Vanessa shifted in her seat, her hands trembling. I returned to this house as a maid, I said, letting the confession hang in the air. Not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I needed to see what greed looks like up close. I needed to understand how far people would go to bury the truth. A reporter shouted, Mrs. Whitmore, are you saying you lived here undercover? Yes, I said simply, and I learned something valuable. Power doesn't corrupt, it exposes. It shows exactly who people were all along. I turned toward Vanessa, who flinched under the weight of the cameras now trained on her. This woman, I said, mocked me, humiliated me, and made me clean the very floor she walked on, never realizing it was mine. She lied to my husband. She forged my name. She thought cruelty was strength. Les! Vanessa cried out, standing abruptly. She's delusional. You can't prove any of this. Harold stepped forward again, placing a stack of documents on the press table. Actually, we can. Signed statements, financial records, email correspondence, all verified by the SEC this morning. Vanessa's voice broke. Charles, say something. But Charles just stared at the floor, shoulders slumped. The fight had gone out of him. I looked back to the crowd. For years, they used my silence as proof of their superiority. They mistook grace for weakness, kindness for stupidity. But let me tell you something, silence is not surrender. Sometimes it's the sound before the storm. Applause broke out, not polite applause, but the kind that erupts from sheer catharsis. Cameras clicked wildly. The moment was already being immortalized. I held up one final document. This is the original ownership deed to Whitmore Holdings, signed by Robert Whitmore and myself. Every decision made after his death without my authorization is hereby void. Effective immediately, I am reinstating control not to reclaim wealth, but to restore integrity. Someone from the back shouted, What about the employees who lost their jobs during the cutbacks? They'll be reinstated, I said, with back pay. This company will no longer reward greed. It will reward effort. I looked directly into the cameras. And to every woman who's ever been told she's just a wife, just a mother, just a maid, remember this. You are never just anything. You are the foundation the world stands on. The applause this time was thunderous. I stepped back from the podium, letting the sound wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. Then a voice behind me, familiar, quiet, trembling. Grandmother. I turned. It was Samuel. He stood near the side entrance, his face pale but resolute. The cameras turned to him instantly. He walked up to the stage, ignoring Vanessa's frantic gestures for him to sit down. Is it true? He asked softly. You're really her. I smiled. Yes, Samuel, I am. He looked at Charles, then at Vanessa, then back at me. Then everything they said about you all those years, it was a lie. Yes, I said. And now the truth belongs to you as much as it does to me. He nodded slowly, then turned to the crowd. My grandfather built this company with integrity. My grandmother is the only one who's kept it. From today forward, I stand with her. The crowd erupted again, flashbulbs, gasps, applause. Vanessa let out a strangled cry and rushed toward him. "Samuel, don't you dare!" He stepped back. "You taught me to admire Power Mother. She taught me to respect truth. I've made my choice." Vanessa collapsed into her chair, sobbing quietly. Charles sank beside her head in his hands. I turned back to the crowd voice, steady despite the lump in my throat. Whitmore Holdings will no longer be a symbol of greed. It will be a legacy of redemption. And it begins now. The moderator stepped up hesitantly. "Does this mean you're assuming leadership, Mrs. Whitmore?" I smiled faintly. "No, I'm passing it on." I gestured toward Samuel, to someone who remembers where we came from. Gasps filled the room again. Samuel looked stunned. "Me? You're the only Whitmore who hasn't forgotten what honesty looks like," I said. "The company needs that more than anything." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "I won't let you down." "I know," I said, "because you carry the best of both of us." When I stepped away from the podium, the cameras followed. The reporters shouted questions, but I didn't hear them. The noise faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. As I reached the exit, I turned one last time. Charles and Vanessa sat together in silence, two monarchs dethroned by the woman they dismissed as invisible. The banner above them fluttered slightly in the air conditioning, its words mocking them now, "Legacy of Excellence." If you've ever dreamed of standing in the same room where they once broke, you tell me, what would you say? Would you beg them to see you, or would you let the truth do the talking? Comment one if you believe the loudest revenge is dignity. Like if you think some legacies aren't inherited, they're reclaimed. Because that night, I didn't just take back my name. I gave it a future. News doesn't travel fast anymore. It explodes. By dawn the next morning, my face was everywhere, newspapers, television. Online headlines screaming, "The maid who owned the mansion and hidden widow exposes corporate empire." Overnight, I had become both myth and mirror, the living embodiment of everything they'd underestimated. My phone, silent for years, buzzed relentlessly. Calls from journalists, investors, even old acquaintances who suddenly remembered my name. But the one that mattered most came from the staff. "Mrs. Whitmore," Marco said, his voice trembling with emotion, "we saw the broadcast. You did it. You really did it." I smiled into the receiver. "No, Marco, we did. You all stood by and watched their cruelty and survived. That makes you part of the story, too." By noon, the mansion was surrounded by news vans and curious neighbors. Reporters shouted questions through the gates, their voices muffled by the iron bars. "Mrs. Whitmore, how does it feel to reclaim your company? Do you plan to press charges against your stepson and his wife?" I said nothing. Some victories don't need commentary. Silence was my first weapon. It would remain my last. Inside, the air felt different, lighter. The staff moved with a new kind of energy, not fear, but reverence. Even the youngest maid who used to flinch whenever Vanessa's heels clicked down the hallway hummed softly as she worked. The house, once suffocating, breathed again. Harold arrived mid-morning, a folded newspaper tucked under his arm. "You're the lead story everywhere," he said, setting it on the table. The headline read, "She served their drinks, then served them justice." I couldn't help but laugh. "The world does love a good twist," I said. He sat opposite me. "You've changed more than a company, Helen. You've changed a conversation." "What conversation?" "The one about women like you, women who built everything and were written out of the story. You've given them a face again." I stared out the window at the camera crews waiting beyond the gates. Let them see the wrinkles then. Let them know strength doesn't age. In the afternoon, messages began pouring in. Hundreds of them. Some from employees I hadn't met, others from women across the country. "I quit my job today after 20 years of being invisible. Thank you. My husband always said I wasn't capable. Watching you reminded me I am." One from a janitor in Chicago simply read, "You gave me courage." I hadn't expected to become a symbol. I only wanted justice. But sometimes justice lights fires you never meant to start. By evening, the Whitmore estate was trending on every social platform. Videos from the press conference had been clipped, edited, and shared millions of times. The moment I said "you are never just anything" had become a rallying cry, subtitled and reposted, with music swelling behind it. People were calling it the Maid's Manifesto. Inside the mansion, Charles and Vanessa had retreated to separate rooms. I hadn't seen either since the conference. But their silence told me more than their words ever had. Harold told me their accounts were frozen, their reputations in ruins. They'll face investigation, he said. It could take years to untangle all the fraud. Years, I repeated. Time has a way of teaching humility. At sunset, I walked into the ballroom again. The stage was still there, the lights dim now, but the memory of that night clung to the air. I could almost hear the echoes of applause, the gasps, the breaking of chains. I thought of all the women whose lives had been spent in the shadows, wives, mothers, caretakers, dismissed as background noise in stories written by men. I pulled out my phone and recorded a short message not for the media, but for them. To every woman who's ever been called too old, too quiet, too small, remember this silence can move mountains when it's finally broken. Don't wait for permission to speak. Take the floor. It's yours. I sent it to Harold. Post it, I said. No edits. Later that night, as I sat in Robert's old study, I heard footsteps in the doorway. Samuel stood there holding a stack of files. It's starting, he said. The restructuring plan. The board wants to meet tomorrow. I gestured for him to sit. And how do you feel about being the new face of Whitmore Holdings? He smiled shyly, terrified. Good, I said. Fear keeps you honest. Never lose it. He opened one of the files pages of proposed reforms. I want to raise employee pay, restore their pensions, and set up a fund for whistleblowers. So what happened to you never happens again. I studied him, pride blooming quietly in my chest. Your grandfather would have been proud. What about you, he asked. I'm proud too, I said, but pride fades. Integrity doesn't. Protect that. Outside, camera flashes lit the night sky like distant lightning. The world was still watching, still hungry for the next chapter. But for me, the storm had passed. The next morning, I woke to a sound I hadn't heard in years, birds in the garden. The air smelled of rain and renewal. As I poured my tea, I saw through the window that someone had placed flowers by the gate, white lilies, my favorite. A note tied to the bouquet read, "For the woman who taught us that dignity never dies." I smiled, not because I wanted the praise, but because somewhere out there, a stranger understood. If you've ever witnessed truth burn its way through lies, tell me, did you feel fear or did you feel freedom? Comment 1. If you believe silence can start revolutions. Like if you think the world finally sees the people it once made invisible. Because that morning I realized revenge wasn't fire. It was light, and it was spreading. Justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't roar. It settles. It seeps into the cracks like sunlight after a storm. The week following the press conference was chaos for everyone but me. Charles and Vanessa were summoned for questioning. Their lawyers quit mid-hearing when evidence of forged signatures surfaced. Headlines turned merciless Whitmore couple under federal investigation. The fall of the Golden Heirs. Their photos, once glossy with privilege, now looked drained under the flash of courthouse cameras. I didn't attend the hearings. I didn't need to. Watching their empire crumble from a distance was enough. The truth didn't need my applause. It was doing just fine without me. Harold kept me updated. They'll lose everything he said over tea one morning. Accounts frozen, assets seized, travel restricted. It's poetic. Poetry, I replied, isn't written in revenge. It's written in survival. He smiled. You always did have the better lines. In the mansion, the staff moved differently now, freer, louder. They laughed in the halls where they used to whisper. The old fear had evaporated, replaced by something almost wholly relief. I'd reinstated fair wages, health benefits, and a rotating schedule that gave everyone weekends off. No one should serve without rest, I told Marco, who nodded through tears. Not even me. I stopped sleeping in the attic. I moved back into the master suite, the one Robert and I shared long ago. The sheets smelled of lavender, just as they had then. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to wake up without dread. Sometimes, when the morning light hit the curtains, I half expected to hear Robert humming from the bathroom the way he always did before board meetings. But now, the quiet didn't hurt. It comforted. Vanessa and Charles had vanished from public life. Their lawyers issued statements about regret and miscommunication, but the world wasn't listening anymore. Empires fall fast when built on arrogance. I heard through Harold that Vanessa had tried to sell her jewelry to pay legal fees while Charles moved into a small apartment downtown. He'd gone gray in less than a month. I didn't celebrate their misery. I didn't need to. The silence of consequence was punishment enough. Samuel visited often. He came not as heir, but as student. "I'm still learning," he said during one of our breakfasts papers spread across the table. "Every decision feels heavier now." "Good," I told him. "It means you're carrying it properly." He was rebuilding Whitmore Holdings from the inside out, smaller, humbler, cleaner. He called it Project Phoenix after the mythic bird reborn from ashes. I approved the name. Some things deserve resurrection. One evening, he showed me a draft of the company's new mission statement. Integrity, legacy, humanity. "Do you think grandfather would like it?" he asked. I think I said softly, "He'd like knowing someone finally means it." The press tried to lure me back into the spotlight. Talk shows, interviews, documentaries, offers arrived daily, but I declined them all. I'd already said what I needed to say, not with words, but with action. Fame is just another cage gilded with validation. Freedom, I'd learned, was found in anonymity reclaimed. Still, the world wouldn't forget. The story had taken on a life of its own. An old woman's quiet rebellion turned into legend. Schools taught it as a case study. Women's organizations quoted my lines. Somewhere, someone would always whisper my name when they needed courage to stand up. That was enough immortality for me. A month after the trial began, I returned to Robert's grave. The winter air was sharp, the sky heavy with gray. I brushed the leaves from the headstone and set down a single white lily. "You'd laugh if you saw it, Robert," I said. "Our name on the news again, but this time for something real." The wind moved softly through the trees. For a moment I swore I could hear his voice, the same calm tone that steadied me through every storm. "You did well, Helen. You remembered who you are." When I left the cemetery, the world felt lighter. Justice had been done, not perfectly, not cleanly, but truly, and that was enough. If you've ever watched someone face the weight of their own deeds, tell me, did you feel vengeance or peace? Comment 1. If you believe karma doesn't need witnesses. Like if you think truth always arrives even if it takes years. Because that winter, as the snow fell over the mansion I had reclaimed, I realized something profound. Revenge ends a story, but dignity that begins one. 6 months later, the house stood quiet again, but this time it was peace, not emptiness. The marble no longer echoed with orders, the hallways no longer smelled of tension. Life had returned to something simple, almost sacred. I had spent the last few months setting things in order, legal transfers, charitable foundations, goodbyes. The empire was alive again, but it no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the future. Samuel had become everything I hoped he would be. The boy who once hid from the noise of his family now spoke before investors with conviction. He kept his promises to restore fairness, to honor the people who'd built Whitmore Holdings from the ground up. "We're not just making profit," he said in his first public address. "We're rebuilding trust." The world believed him. So did I. I began spending more time in the garden Robert had designed for me, the same garden where Vanessa once told me to sweep fallen leaves. Now I let them stay. The wind had its own design, and I'd learned that not everything broken needed fixing. Some things just needed to breathe. One afternoon, as I sat by the fountain with a cup of tea, Samuel joined me. "The Phoenix Foundation launched today," he said, eyes shining. "Scholarships for women, over 50 people who left their careers for family who want a second chance." I smiled. "Good. Make sure they know there's no expiration date on brilliance." He laughed. "You'll tell them yourself. We're naming the first grant after you." "I don't need that," I said softly. He shook his head. "It's not for you. It's for every woman who'll see your name and realize it's never too late to be seen." The afternoon light turned gold, reflecting on the water. For the first time in a long time, I felt the ache of pride without the sting of loss. "Then promise me one thing," I said. "When people ask what made this company strong again, don't say power. Say conscience." He nodded, always. After he left, I walked through the mansion one last time. Room by room, memory by memory. The ballroom where I'd once been humiliated and later redeemed. The study where Robert wrote his last speech. The attic where I hid the evidence that rebuilt my name. Each space had been both battlefield and sanctuary. I touched the walls, whispered thanks, and closed the doors behind me. When I reached the front steps, the sun was setting. The sky burned orange and violet over the city skyline, a view I'd seen from this threshold 1,000 times, but never like this. I wasn't leaving in shame or triumph or even nostalgia. I was leaving complete. I locked the doors, placed the key in an envelope marked for Samuel, and slid it beneath the brass lion knocker. Then I walked down the stone path, each step softer than the last. At the gate, reporters waited, cameras ready. But when they saw my face, they lowered them. No questions, no noise, just quiet respect. Maybe they finally understood some stories end not with an explosion, but with an exhale. As I reached the car, I looked back one last time. The mansion stood still against the fading light, no longer a monument to greed, but to grace. And I thought if I could tell the world one final thing, it would be this. Dignity doesn't come from revenge. It comes from remembering who you are when the world forgets. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means freeing yourself from the weight of those who tried to bury you. If you've ever been made to feel small, tell me, what would you do if one day the world finally saw you again? Comment 1 if you'd rise. Like if you believe it's never too late to reclaim your name. Because I learned the greatest truth of all. They called me invisible, but I was only waiting for the right light to be seen.